Well, today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. That is the first sentence of a statement released by the family of a woman who accused the man who the British until today called Prince Andrew of raping her when she was 17 years old. The British press and the press around the world is reporting tonight what the New York Times calls, quote, an extraordinary punishment that man named Andrew has now suffered at the hands of his brother, who is the current claimant of the title King of England. His older brother, a so-called king, had already taken his house away on the palace grounds and banished him to his still royal country house. And today, finally, the absurd title has been removed. The extraordinary punishment the New York Times is referring to is that Andrew will no longer be called a prince, and, quote, will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And while we're on the subject, Windsor is a fake name too. Windsor is an invented name used to mask the German heritage of the people who have been claiming the position of royal family in Britain for the entire 20th and 21st century. In 1917, in the middle of the First World War, with England fighting against Germany, the so-called British royal family decided to mask their German background by plucking from out of nowhere the classically English-sounding name Windsor and suddenly claiming it as their own. The truth is a name change is not punishment. If you offered Jeffrey Epstein the option of being arrested and sent to prison as a child rapist or having to change his name, which do you think he would have chosen? And so now the big punishment for Andrew is that no one in Britain will call him the Duke of York or His Royal Highness, which no sane person anywhere ever should have called him? None of those preposterous descriptors of that human being have ever been allowed on this program. He had his titles removed from him on this program on the first mention of his disgraced name here. Nothing changed today. There was no new evidence for Andrew's older brother to suddenly react today, but the weight of Jeffrey Epstein's legacy forced the King of England to symbolically and only symbolically distance himself from his deeply Epstein-involved little brother. The manipulative so-called king wants it both ways. He wants to suggest that there's a possibility that his little brother did not rape Virginia Giuffre, as she claimed. And so the statement issued by the king's press release writers said, these censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. And then the king's writers tell this lie about the rest of the family, saying, their majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Okay, then give them the houses on your country estates. You just gave your accused rapist little brother another country house on your family's estates to live in for free for the rest of his life, and you claim that your utmost sympathies are not with your little brother, the accused rapist, but your utmost sympathies are with, quote, the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Do you mean any and all forms of abuse visited upon people around the world by the British Crown throughout its ugly history? Or do you just mean the survivors of any and all forms of abuse delivered directly to them by individual members of your family? The New York Times points out today that Charles and his little brother have done quite a job on that whole concept of British support of a monarchy during their public lifetimes. In 2023, a poll of British social attitudes by the National Center for Social Research found that 54% of people surveyed said that it was very or quite important for Britain to have a monarchy, compared with 86% in 1983. That 86% support of a monarchy was in the second year of Charles' first marriage to Diana, which ended miserably and helped drive support of the monarchy down every day, with Andrew then bursting into public view much later to drag it down into the mud from which we can hope it then sinks and disappears. The difference between the Charles who calls himself a king and the Donald who wants to be one is that Donald Trump does not care what comes after him. Charles wants the monarchy to live forever. Donald Trump knows that he cannot live forever. Donald Trump knows that his presidency cannot live forever. So Donald Trump knows that all he has to do is keep the Epstein files secret for the next 3.5 years. And the intensity of Donald Trump's apparent need to keep the Epstein files secret becomes more vivid every day, especially with every new day of the government shutdown. Congressman Robert Garcia is a leader of the Democrats who have joined with some Republicans in the House of Representatives who are trying to have the Epstein files released. And he now sees the government shutdown as being as much or more about the Epstein files as it is about the federal budget.
It's criminal. It's outrageous that we have a duly elected member certified. The election's been certified by her own state. There's over 800,000 people in the state of Arizona with no representation in the Congress because Mike Johnson is afraid of the Epstein files and is currently right now playing cover up for Donald Trump and the White House. This idea that we now have a shutdown because they're too scared of the truth, they're too scared of getting justice for the survivors of women and girls that have been trafficked, as we know, in the past by Jeffrey Epstein and other powerful men. And so this shutdown has become, I think, really emblematic of the corruption in the Republican Party.
We now have a shutdown because you are too scared of the truth. The shutdown appeared to be about budget issues at the beginning, but as it drags on with absolutely no attempt to negotiate those budget issues, you have a right to wonder what it is really about. And with the Speaker of the House using the government shutdown as an excuse for not swearing in the newest elected member of the House of Representatives who would become the decisive vote in the House to release the Epstein files, gives Congressman Garcia more than enough evidence to reasonably argue that, quote, we now have a shutdown because you are too scared of the truth. If the shutdown is not about the Epstein files, then prove it. Speaker Johnson can swear in the newest elected member of the House of Representatives tomorrow, Adelita Grijalva. And the only reason he is not doing that is that she would then immediately become the decisive vote to release the Epstein files. Technically, she would become the 218th signature on a so-called discharge petition, which forces a vote in the House of Representatives on releasing the Epstein files, a vote everyone knows will pass. And so Donald Trump travels the world avoiding any possible negotiation to end the shutdown because the shutdown shuts down the Epstein files. Donald Trump proves the pointlessness of his world travels whenever he talks about them. Today on Air Force One, after his meetings in China, he told reporters something that would be unthinkable for any other president in that situation. He said, quote, Taiwan never came up. It was not discussed. Taiwan never came up. No kidding. It never comes up unless the American president brings it up. No Chinese dictator has ever jumped into a discussion on Taiwan unless forced to by an American president. And so Donald Trump is treating himself as just a spectator in the back of the room saying Taiwan never came up. Don't know why, it just never came up. Thereby proving the utter pointlessness of the Trump world tour, other than as a distraction from the Epstein files and a distraction from the cruelties that Donald Trump is inflicting around the world and at home every day. Of course, Taiwan never came up. It would only come up in a serious discussion between a president of the United States and a Chinese dictator. And that is not what was happening. Donald Trump said he was going to change his illegal and unconstitutional tariff structure with China, leaving most of the illegal and unconstitutional tariffs in place. And he did that a week before the United States Supreme Court will hear the first case brought to them challenging the illegal and unconstitutional Trump tariffs. This week is the worst week for Donald Trump to be playing arbitrary public games with his tariffs, showing how non-policy based they actually are. But that is how confident he is that the Supreme Court he appointed will let him do what he wants to do. Donald Trump must believe that his Supreme Court will find a way to change the Constitution for him and remove Congress's exclusive, constitutionally granted power by the founders to set tariffs. Donald Trump was asked no questions today about Jeffrey Epstein. White House reporters know that asking a question about Jeffrey Epstein means two things. They won't get an answer, and they won't get another question. So they asked no questions about the British reaction to what appears to be the release of Virginia Giuffre's memoir titled Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Virginia Giuffre survived Jeffrey Epstein's abuse and Ghislaine Maxwell's physical abuse of her as long as she could, but she ended her own life in April of this year, leaving her co-author to complete her book that has just been released. But Donald Trump flying around the world to avoid the pressure of the Epstein files while the British monarchy fears their own collapse under the pressure of the Epstein files and Virginia Giuffre's memoir. With all of that happening, her family released a statement today saying, quote, "Today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. Virginia Giuffre, our sister, a child when she was sexually assaulted by Andrew, never stopped fighting for accountability for what had happened to her and to countless other survivors like her. Today, she declares victory. We, her family, along with her survivor sisters, continue Virginia's battle and will not rest until the same accountability applies to all of the abusers and abettors connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell." Today, over 20 survivors of the abuse visited upon them by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell urged the House of Representatives to swear in the newest elected member of the House and allow her to become the deciding vote on the Epstein files. Their statement says, "The continued refusal to seat her is an unacceptable breach of democratic norms and a disservice to the American people. Even more concerning to us as survivors, this delay appears to be a deliberate attempt to block her participation in the discharge petition that would force a vote to unseal the Epstein-Maxwell files. The American public has a right to transparency and accountability, and we, as survivors, deserve justice. Any attempt to obstruct a vote on this matter by manipulating House procedure or denying elected members their seats is a direct affront to that right and adds insult to our trauma. Speaker Johnson must stop using procedural tactics to protect the powerful and instead uphold the integrity of our democratic institutions. Our trauma is not a pawn in your political games. Every day you stall is another day survivors are denied justice and the American people are denied the truth. Swear in, Representative Grijalva, and let democracy speak."